4 Messerschmitts close in from 6 o'clock. The bomber's tail gunner is dead. The intercom crackles with static and panic. The pilot reaches down, not for the throttle, but for the rudder pedals. What happens next violates every rule in the manual. It also saves 23 lives before sunrise. England, March 1943. The air over Europe belongs to those willing to burn for it. Every night, streams of heavy bombers lumber into German airspace. Lancaster, Halifax, Stirling. Their silhouettes blot out stars. Their engines shake the cold out of the clouds. Inside each fuselage, young men sit surrounded by aviation fuel, high explosives, and hope measured in odds. The odds are not favorable. Bomber Command loses aircraft faster than factories can replace them. Over Essen, over Hamburg, over the Ruhr Valley's blackened sprawl, German night fighters tear through formations like wolves through wool. Flak bursts blossom in orange geometry. Searchlights cone upward, white and unblinking, holding bombers in place long enough for the kill. Survival is mathematics. Speed, altitude, evasion, luck. But mostly luck. The standard defensive maneuver against a pursuing fighter is the corkscrew, a violent spiraling dive, port and starboard, up and down, designed to spoil the enemy's firing solution. It works, sometimes, if the pilot is skilled, if the airframe holds, if the fighter pilot is inexperienced or low on ammunition. But the corkscrew is slow. It bleeds altitude and speed. And when 4 fighters converge at once, geometry wins. The bomber becomes a fixed point in a collapsing sphere. Cannon shells walk up the fuselage. Fire blooms in the wing roots. The aircraft breaks apart over farmland that will forget its name by morning. This is the problem no tactician has solved. How do you survive what you cannot outrun, outclimb, or outgun? Most crews don't ask the question. They follow the manual, trust their training, and die in alphabetical order by squadron. But there is a pilot, a quiet one, a man who flew crop dusters over Canadian wheat fields before the war taught him to fly bombers over burning cities. His name is Charlie Foster. He does not believe the manual is scripture. If you want more such stories, like and subscribe so these lives aren't forgotten. Charlie Foster grew up in Saskatchewan, where the horizon is a straight line and the wind never stops. He learned to fly in 1936, barnstorming county fairs and dusting fields for farmers who paid in fuel and meals. The aircraft were light, fragile, temperamental, fabric and wood and wire. They required feel, not force. You flew them with your fingertips and the seat of your pants. You learned the edge of a stall not from instruments, but from the shudder in the airframe and the whisper of wind through the struts. Foster was good at it. Not flashy, just precise. He could drop a biplane into a pasture shorter than a tennis court. He could hold altitude in a crosswind without glancing at the altimeter. He understood something many trained pilots never grasp. An aircraft is not a machine you command. It is a system you negotiate. When war came, the Royal Canadian Air Force sent him to bombing school. They put him in the left seat of a twin-engine Anson, then a Wellington, then finally a Halifax. Heavy, stable, reliable, built to carry 7 men and 4 tons of bombs into the heart of the Reich and, with luck, bring them home. Foster adapted, but he did not forget the lessons of the biplane. While other pilots learned to trust instruments and protocols, Foster still felt the aircraft through his hands and feet. He noticed things, the way the rudder shuddered in a climbing turn, the way the bomber yawed slightly in turbulence, like a boat in a crosswind, the way the tail surfaces, huge and far behind the cockpit, created leverage most pilots ignored. He filed these observations away, not for any purpose, just habit, curiosity. the instinct of someone who spent years coaxing broken machinery into improbable grace. By early 1943, Foster is a flight lieutenant, 26 years old, 18 missions completed. His crew trusts him. They have seen him bring them through flak curtains and fighter passes with a calmness that borders on eerie. He does not shout, he does not rush. He flies the way a carpenter planes wood, steady pressure, fine adjustments, respect for the grain. But even Foster cannot solve the fighter problem. Not yet. Not until the night over Gelsenkirchen, when geometry and desperation give him no choice but to try something stupid. The mission brief is standard. Target: synthetic oil refinery outside Gelsenkirchen. Load: incendiaries and high explosive. Expected resistance: heavy flak, moderate fighter activity. Expected losses: 12 to 15%. Foster's Halifax, call sign Baker 2, takes off just after midnight. The sky is clear, the moon is a sliver. Good for concealment, bad for navigation. The stream climbs over the North Sea, crosses the Dutch coast, and turns southeast into the blackness over Germany. They reach the target at 0147 hours. The city below is a grid of fire. Pathfinders have marked the refinery with green flares. The first wave has already dropped. Smoke rises in columns thick enough to buffet the bombers overhead. Foster steadies Baker 2 on the bombing run, straight and level. The bomb aimer counts down. The aircraft lurches as the payload falls away. Then the searchlights find them. 3 beams converge, locking Baker 2 in a cone of white light. Instantly, flak erupts around them, black puffs stitched with orange cores. Shrapnel pings off the fuselage. Foster banks hard, diving out of the cone, but the damage is done. The lights have painted them, and somewhere above, the night fighters are watching. The first attacker comes in from above and behind. A Messerschmitt Bf-110, twin-engine, heavy cannon in the nose. The tail gunner calls it out, traverses his turret, fires a burst. Tracers arc into the dark. The fighter breaks off, circles, repositions, then 3 more appear. Single-engine Bf-109s, fast and nimble, they orbit the bomber like sharks around a wounded seal, waiting for the geometry to align. Foster tries the corkscrew. He throws the Halifax into a diving turn, port side, then starboard, climbing again, rolling the wings to spoil their aim. It works for the first pass. Cannon fire streams past the canopy, missing by meters. But the fighters do not disengage. They reposition, patient, coordinated. Foster realizes the trap. The corkscrew bleeds airspeed. Each maneuver costs him knots he cannot afford to lose. The fighters are faster. They can circle, wait, close again. And now they are coordinating. Too high, too low, attacking in sequence, one after another. The tail gunner cannot cover all vectors at once. Baker. 2 is a fixed point in a collapsing envelope. In 30 seconds, maybe less, cannon shells will gut the fuselage or ignite the fuel tanks. Foster's mind races through options. Dive for the deck. No, the fighters will follow, and the flak will kill them. Climb, suicidal, they are already too slow. Continue the corkscrew, delaying the inevitable. There is no doctrine for this, no maneuver in the manual, no comforting procedure. But there is a memory, an old one. A biplane in a crosswind, yawing hard, tail swinging wide like a pendulum. The way the nose snapped around when he stamped the rudder. An idea forms, illogical, absurd, possibly suicidal. But geometry is geometry, and desperation is its own kind of clarity. Foster makes a decision no instructor would approve. He tells the crew to brace. He does not explain. There is no time. He pulls the throttles back slightly. Not much, just enough to let the airspeed bleed another 10 knots. The Halifax slows, wallowing in the thin air. The flight engineer glances at him, confused. Slower means easier to hit. Slower means death. Foster ignores him. He grips the control column with his left hand. His right hand stays on the throttles. Both feet rest on the rudder pedals, waiting. The first fighter lines up astern, 400 yards back, closing. The tail gunner fires. Tracers stream out. The fighter does not break. It knows the bomber is dying. It can afford patience. 300 yards. 200. Foster watches the moonlight glint off the fighter's cowling. He counts seconds. He feels the bomber's weight, the sluggish response of the controls, the mushy feedback through the yoke. 100 yards. Then he stamps the left rudder pedal to the floor. The Halifax's nose does not turn. The wings do not bank. Instead, the entire fuselage yaws violently sideways. The tail swings out like a barn door in a gale. The bomber skids through the air. Tail first, a maneuver no heavy aircraft is supposed to perform. For exactly 2 seconds, the fighter pilot sees not the bomber's tail, but its entire broadside. A wall of metal filling his windscreen. He yanks the stick, diving away, overshooting wildly, his firing solution obliterated. Foster releases the rudder. The bomber shudders, swings back, stabilizes. Airspeed bleeds dangerously low. The stall warning rattles. But they are still flying, and the fighter is gone. The second attacker comes in immediately. Foster waits, counts, then stamps the right rudder. The tail whips the opposite direction. Again the fighter overshoots, unable to track the sudden lateral displacement. Again, Baker 2 survives. The third and fourth fighters converge simultaneously, high and low. The geometry should be inescapable. Foster uses both rudders in sequence. Left, hard, right, harder. The bomber fishtails through the sky like a drunk driver on ice. The fighters, confused, unable to predict the skid, break off. One passes so close the tail gunner sees the pilot's face, white and startled behind his oxygen mask. Silence. The night is empty again. Baker 2 limbs westward, alone, battered, still burning fuel. The crew says nothing. They do not understand what just happened. Only that they are alive. Foster's hands are steady on the yoke. His heartbeat is slow. He has just broken every rule of bomber doctrine. He has turned a 30-ton aircraft into a crop duster. And it worked. Foster does not report the maneuver, not officially. The post-mission debrief is standard. Flak moderate. Fighters engaged. Evasive action successful. Crew uninjured. Aircraft damaged but flyable. But word spreads. Crews talk. Especially when a bomber comes home that should not have. Other pilots ask questions. Foster explains, carefully, using his hands to sketch the geometry. Most shake their heads. It sounds insane. A heavy bomber does not yaw like a crop duster. The airframe is not designed for it. The rudder authority is insufficient. The risk of a flat spin, of overstressing the tail assembly, of losing control entirely, unacceptable. Foster shrugs. He does not argue. He only says that it worked when nothing else would. A few pilots, the ones who have survived too many close calls, listen differently. They ask him to demonstrate, to explain the exact inputs, the timing, the airspeed, the angle. Foster takes them through it. It is not a maneuver you can practice safely, not in a bomber, not over England. The margins are too narrow, the consequences of error too absolute. But the logic is sound. The rudder, at low speed in a heavy aircraft with a long moment arm, can induce a lateral skid faster than ailerons can roll the wings. The fighter pilot, tracking the bomber's tail, suddenly sees the entire fuselage broadsiding across his gun sight. His brain cannot process it in time, Muscle memory takes over. He pulls away to avoid collision. It is not about outrunning the fighter. It is about breaking his targeting loop, about introducing chaos into his certainty. Some pilots try it, quietly, without permission, on missions where the alternative is death. Most fail. The timing is too precise, the airspeed too critical. A few succeed and survive. By summer, the maneuver has a name, not an official one. The ground crews call it Foster's fishtail. The pilots call it other things, some flattering, some not. Bomber Command does not endorse it. They do not forbid it either. Officially, it does not exist. Unofficially, flight instructors begin teaching it in hushed tones, in the dispersal huts after dark, to crews desperate for any edge. The data is impossible to collect cleanly, but over the following months, a pattern emerges. Bombers that should have been lost return damaged but intact. Crews report successful evasions using unorthodox rudder inputs. Loss rates, for certain squadrons, tick downward. Not dramatically. War is still war, but enough to matter. Foster flies 14 more missions. Baker, too, is eventually scrapped after taking flak damage over Mannheim. Foster transitions to another Halifax, then another. He uses the fishtail twice more. Both times, it saves his crew. On his 33rd mission, October 1943, his aircraft is hit by flak over Kassel. The port wing catches fire. Foster holds the bomber steady long enough for the crew to bail out. 6 men escape. Foster and the flight engineer stay too long, fighting the controls, trying to keep the nose up. The Halifax rolls inverted at 800 feet. There is no time. The wreckage is found in a farmer's field. 2 bodies, 7 empty parachute harnesses. Foster is 26 years old. The war continues without him. The bombers keep flying. The losses continue. But the fishtail persists, passed down like folklore, from veteran crews to replacements, from squadron to squadron. It is never standardized, never drilled in training. The RAF does not revise its manuals to include it. But pilots know, and when the geometry collapses and the fighters close in and the odds become arithmetic, some remember the crop duster from Saskatchewan who broke the rules because the rules were killing him. Post-war analysis is fragmentary. Bomber Command's records are incomplete. Many mission reports are lost or destroyed, but scattered accounts survive. A navigator's diary, a gunner's letter home, a squadron intelligence officer's marginal note. One entry, dated July 1943, describes a Halifax evading 4 fighters over the Rudder using violent rudder application inconsistent with standard doctrine. The bomber returned. The crew survived. Another, from September, records a similar event. A Lancaster, cornered by 3 FW-190s, skidded laterally in a manner suggesting control malfunction. The fighters broke off. The bomber completed its mission. These are not isolated incidents. They are echoes, ripples spreading outward from a single act of improvisation over Gelsenkirchen. Historians, decades later, estimate that rudder-based evasion techniques may have contributed to the survival of dozens, possibly hundreds, of bomber crews. The numbers are small in the context of a war that consumed millions. But to the men in those aircraft, the math is absolute. Alive or dead, home or missing. Foster's name does not appear in official histories. There is no medal, no commendation. His personnel file lists him as killed in action, October 1943, over Kassel. Circumstances: aircraft lost to enemy action. Next of kin notified. But in certain circles, among aging veterans and aviation historians, the story endures. The stupid rudder trick, the fishtail, the thing you did when doctrine failed and geometry turned against you. It is remembered not because it was elegant, but because it was true. There is a photograph, black and white, edges worn. It shows a young man in a flight suit standing in front of a Halifax bomber. He is not smiling. His hands rest in his pockets. Behind him, the ground crew is visible, blurred, working on the starboard engine. The photo was taken in May 1943, 2 months after Gelsenkirchen, 5 months before Kassel. Foster's expression is calm, not proud, not haunted, just present, the face of someone who has seen the edge and stepped back, knowing he will have to step forward again. After the war, one of Foster's crew, his navigator, who bailed out over Kassel and spent the rest of the war in a POW camp, returns to Saskatchewan. He visits Foster's family. He tells them what happened, not the official version, the real one. He describes the night over Gelsenkirchen, the 4 fighters, the moment Foster stamped the rudder and the world tilted sideways, the silence afterward, when they realized they were still breathing. He tells them their son saved not just his own crew, but others. Men he never met, men who flew bombers months or years later and survived because someone, somewhere, remembered the crop duster who turned a 30-ton Halifax into a biplane. The family listens. They do not speak. When the navigator finishes, Foster's father thanks him. Then he asks a question. Did Charlie know? That it would spread? That others would use it? The navigator shakes his head. No. Charlie did it because the alternative was death. He shared it because someone asked. He never claimed it was genius. Just geometry and a little bit of Saskatchewan stubbornness. The photograph remains in the family for decades. Eventually, it is donated to a museum. It sits now in an archive in Ottawa, filed under Bomber Command 1943 Personnel. Visitors pass it without pause. There is no plaque, no explanation. Just a young man in a flight suit standing in front of an aircraft that no longer exists, commemorating a moment no camera captured. But the moment was real, and it mattered. In war, most innovations are born from institutions, from laboratories and committees and think tanks, from men with titles and resources and time. But some come from the edge, from the moment when doctrine fails and instinct takes over, from the crop duster who remembered that an aircraft is not a machine you command, but a system you negotiate. Foster did not invent the rudder. He did not discover physics. He simply refused to die according to someone else's script. And in that refusal, in that single stupid, beautiful act of defiance over Gelsenkirchen, he changed the geometry of survival for hundreds of men who never knew his name. The sky does not remember, but the men who flew through it do, and that, in the end, is the only legacy that matters. Somewhere over the English Channel, November 1943, a B-17 loses its right inboard engine. Not from flak, not from fire. The propeller just tears free, 3,000 pounds of spinning steel ripping through the fuselage like a cleaver. 2 crewmen gone instantly. The bomber falls in pieces. Ground crews recover the wreckage and find something impossible. The engine mount bolts hadn't failed. They'd disintegrated. 13 more bombers are already airborne with the same invisible flaw. The air war over Europe in 1943 is a war of mathematics and metal fatigue. Every day, hundreds of American heavy bombers lumber into hostile skies, each one a constellation of 40,000 rivets, miles of wire, and the hope that engineering margins hold under conditions no blueprint anticipated. The Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress earns its name through redundancy. 4 engines, armored crew stations, self-sealing fuel tanks. It can lose an engine and limp home. It can take cannon fire and stay airborne. But it cannot survive what it does not expect. By autumn, something is wrong. Engines are tearing loose mid-flight. Not often, but often enough. The pattern is subtle, scattered across squadrons, air groups, bases. No single unit sees the full picture. But at 8th Air Force maintenance depots across England, a quiet dread begins to settle in the tool rooms and inspection bays. Mechanics pull engine cowlings in the pre-dawn cold, hands numb, breath fogging under work lights strung between hard stands. They check torque specs, oil lines, vibration mounts. Everything passes inspection. Everything looks correct. Then another bomber goes down, and the wreckage tells the same story. Engine mount bolts sheared clean, propeller assembly gone, nacelle ripped open like paper. The official explanation is combat fatigue, cumulative stress, an unavoidable cost of sustained high-tempo operations. The bolts are military spec, made to exacting standards, tested under laboratory conditions. If they are failing, it must be because the war is pushing machines past their design limits. But one man is unconvinced. His name is Technical Sergeant Raymond Whitlock, and he works the graveyard shift at a bomber depot outside Thurley. He has seen 3 engine separations in 2 months. He has held the failed bolts in his hands, studied the fracture points under magnification, and noticed something the reports do not mention. The bolts do not show the rough, jagged signature of sudden overload. They show fine, regular stress lines, hairline cracks that grew in silence until nothing was left to hold. Whitlock is 34 years old, older than most of the boys he works beside. Before the war, he ran a machine shop in Dayton, fabricating parts for turbines and industrial engines. He knows metal. He knows how steel behaves under cyclical load, how vibration propagates through fasteners, how a part can look perfect until the moment it shatters. He begins collecting failed bolts, keeping them in a wooden crate under his workbench, comparing them, measuring thread wear, surface finish, metallurgical composition. He does this off-shift, without authorization, because officially the investigation is closed. The bolts meet spec, case resolved. But Whitlock sees what the specifications miss. If you want more such stories, like and subscribe so these lives aren't forgotten. Raymond Whitlock grew up in a world where things were meant to be repaired, not replaced. His father was a railroad mechanic, his grandfather a blacksmith. He learned early that metal has memory. Every stress, every heat cycle, every careless strike leaves a mark. He joined the Army Air Forces in 1942, too old for flight training but invaluable on the ground. His personnel file lists him as competent, thorough, unimaginative. The last descriptor is wrong. Whitlock does not lack imagination. He simply distrusts it. He prefers evidence. He works nights because he prefers the quiet. Fewer officers, fewer interruptions, just the sound of wrenches, the hiss of compressed air, the low chatter of men who speak in torque settings and clearance measurements. The night shift is where the actual work happens, where mechanics trace faults, improvise fixes, and keep a fleet airborne through logic and stubbornness. Whitlock is not popular. He does not drink with the crew. He does not tell stories or play cards between shifts. He arrives early, leaves late, and spends his breaks studying maintenance manuals and metallurgy texts ordered from stateside technical libraries. The other mechanics respect his skill, but find him odd. He is the kind of man who notices things others overlook, and in a military bureaucracy, that can be a liability. His workspace is meticulously organized. Tools arranged by size and function, parts labeled and indexed, a notebook filled with sketches, measurements, and observations written in cramped, precise handwriting. He does not trust memory. He writes everything down. In early November, he gets his hands on a batch of replacement engine mount bolts fresh from the supply depot. They are identical to the ones in service, same manufacturer, same lot codes, same specifications. He places one in a vise and examines it under a jeweler's loupe. The threading is clean, the head is properly formed, but the surface finish is too smooth. Not polished, smooth in a way that suggests the outer layer of the steel has been altered. He runs a hardness test using a small file. The surface resists. Harder than it should be. Harder than the core. He sets the bolt aside and tests another. Same result, then another. 5 bolts, 5 identical anomalies. The surface has been case-hardened, a process that makes the outer layer brittle while leaving the interior softer. Under cyclical stress, the hard shell cracks, and the softer core cannot hold the load. It is a metallurgical time bomb. Whitlock knows what this means. Every bomber in the 8th Air Force is flying with compromised bolts. The engines are not failing from fatigue. They are failing because the parts themselves are defective. And, if he is right, dozens of crews are at risk. He takes his findings to his commanding officer, a young lieutenant who oversees the maintenance depot. The lieutenant listens politely, glances at the notebook, and tells Whitlock that the bolts are certified by the Army Air Forces Material Command. They have been tested, approved, issued to every depot in the European theater. Whitlock insists. He explains the hardness differential, the fracture patterns, the case-hardening defect. The lieutenant grows impatient. He reminds Whitlock that metallurgical analysis is not his job. He is a mechanic, not an engineer. If there were a problem, the experts would have found it. Whitlock presses. He suggests sending a sample to the technical division for independent testing. The lieutenant declines. He says it would undermine confidence in the supply chain, create unnecessary alarm, and waste time. The bolts meet spec. That is all that matters. Whitlock leaves the office with his notebook and his crate of failed bolts. He has been dismissed, but he has not been ordered to stop. The problem with military specifications is that they assume ideal conditions. A bolt is tested in a laboratory under controlled load, temperature, and vibration. It passes. It is certified. It is shipped to bases across England, where it is installed on aircraft that fly through sub-zero temperatures, heavy turbulence, and sustained high RPM operation. The real world does not care about laboratory conditions. By mid-November, the 8th Air Force has lost 9 bombers to in-flight engine separations. Officially, the cause is listed as mechanical failure due to combat stress. Unofficially, the losses are troubling. Engine separations are catastrophic. The propeller assembly weighs as much as a small car. When it tears free, it can sever control cables, puncture fuel tanks, or kill crew members. Even if the crew survives, a 3-engine bomber is vulnerable, slow, and often unable to keep formation. The depots receive new directives. Increase inspection intervals, retorque all engine mount bolts before every mission. Check for visible signs of stress or deformation. The mechanics comply, but the failures continue. Whitlock spends his off hours haunting the wreckage yards. He walks among twisted aluminum and scorched steel, searching for engine mounts. He finds them, sheared bolts still in place, threads stripped, heads fractured. He collects samples, labels them, adds them to his growing archive. He tests them all. Every single bolt shows the same defect, the same excessive surface hardness, the same brittle outer layer. He writes a detailed report, complete with measurements, fracture analysis, and a proposed solution. He submits it through official channels. It is rejected. The response is polite but firm. The bolts meet Army Air Force's specifications. They have been tested and certified by qualified engineers. Field mechanics do not have the authority or expertise to challenge materiel standards. His concerns are noted but dismissed. Whitlock considers going higher, writing directly to 8th Air Force Command. But he knows how that will end. He is a sergeant, a mechanic. He has no formal training in metallurgy, no engineering degree, no institutional authority. He has only his eyes, his hands, and a crate of broken bolts. And then, on November 18th, a B-17 from the 91st Bomb Group loses two engines simultaneously, both right-side engines, both propellers tearing free within seconds of each other. The bomber goes into an unrecoverable spin. All 10 crew members are killed. The wreckage is brought to Whitlock's depot for analysis. He is part of the inspection team. He pulls the engine mounts and examines the bolts. Both failures show the same fracture pattern, same brittle surface, same defect. He writes another report. This time he does not submit it through channels. He hands it directly to a visiting colonel from Material Command, a man who has flown combat missions and understands that paperwork does not keep aircraft airborne. The colonel reads it, he asks questions, he listens, then he tells Whitlock to prove it. Whitlock has no laboratory, no testing equipment, no official authorization. What he has is a workbench, a vise, a set of hand tools, and 3 nights before the next wave of bombers goes wheels up. He begins with the simplest test. He takes 2 bolts, one from the defective batch, one from an older supply lot that predates the failures. He installs both in matching engine mount brackets salvaged from scrapped aircraft. He applies the same torque. Then he subjects both to cyclical stress using an improvised vibration rig built from a reciprocating saw and a weighted arm. The defective bolt fails after 4 hours. The older bolt shows no cracks after 12. He repeats the test. Same result. The defective bolts cannot handle sustained vibration. The case-hardened surface cracks, and the core fails. It is not a question of bad luck or extreme conditions. It is a question of bad metallurgy. But proving the defect is not enough. He needs a solution, something that can be implemented immediately, without waiting for new bolts to be manufactured and shipped from the States. Something that works with what they have. He considers the problem. The outer layer is too hard, the core is too soft, the bolt cannot handle the load. But what if the load could be distributed differently? What if the stress could be absorbed before it reached the bolt? He sketches a design in his notebook. A reinforced washer with a slight chamfer machined from softer steel. It would sit between the bolt head and the mounting bracket, acting as a stress buffer. The chamfer would allow the washer to flex slightly under load, absorbing vibration before it could fracture the bolt. It is not elegant, it is not in any manual, but it is achievable. He takes the idea to the machine shop, a cluttered corner of the depot where lathes and milling machines sit under canvas tarps. The machinist on duty is a corporal from Pittsburgh who learned his trade in a steel mill. Whitlock shows him the sketch, explains the problem, asks if it can be done. The corporal studies the drawing. He asks about tolerances, material specs, quantity. Whitlock tells him they need 50 washers by morning. Machined from low-carbon steel, chamfered to a 5-degree angle, surface finish smooth but not polished. The corporal does not ask if this is authorized. He just nods and fires up the lathe. By dawn, they have 60 washers. Whitlock installs a set on a test engine mount and runs the vibration test again. The defective bolt, paired with the new washer, lasts 18 hours without cracking. It is not a permanent fix, but it is enough. He writes a 1-page summary, no technical jargon, no lengthy analysis, just the problem, the test results, and the solution. He attaches a sample washer and hands it to the colonel. The colonel takes it to the engineering staff. They are skeptical. A non-approved modification designed by a mechanic, tested with improvised equipment. It violates every protocol. But they cannot ignore the data. They cannot ignore the bodies. They authorize a field trial. 10 aircraft, 20 engines. All engine mount bolts retrofitted with Whitlock's washers. If a single engine fails, the trial ends. 30 missions, 300 flight hours, 0 failures. The directive comes down on December 2, 1943. All B-17 bombers in the 8th Air Force are to be retrofitted with reinforced stress washers on engine mount bolts. The modification is to be completed within 10 days. Parts are to be machined locally using specifications provided by Technical Sergeant Raymond Whitlock. It is an extraordinary order. Field modifications usually take months to authorize. They require engineering reviews, safety testing, and approval from multiple levels of command. This one is implemented in a week. The machine shops work around the clock. Machinists and mechanics fabricate thousands of washers, each one measured and inspected to ensure consistency. The washers are simple, just a ring of steel with a beveled edge, but they must be precise. Too thick, and they will not seat properly. Too thin, and they will deform under load. Whitlock supervises the production. He checks random samples, verifies dimensions, and ensures that every washer meets the tolerance requirements. He does not sleep. He eats at his workbench, drinks coffee from a dented thermos, and answers questions from mechanics who have never heard of a stress washer and do not understand why they are installing unauthorized parts. He does not tell them it was his idea. He does not take credit. He simply shows them how to install the washer, how to torque the bolt, and how to inspect for proper seating. The work spreads across air bases in England: Thurleigh, Bassingbourn, Kimbolton, Molesworth, every depot, every maintenance crew, every bomber. By December 10th, the retrofit is complete. 2,000 aircraft, 8,000 engines, 32,000 bolts, 32,000 washers that were not in the manual 3 weeks earlier. The bombers fly. They fly through winter storms, through flak-heavy missions over the Rudder, through maximum-effort raids on ball-bearing plants and oil refineries. The engines scream, the airframes shudder, the bolts hold. In the first month after the retrofit, there are 0 engine separations. In the second month, 0. By March 1944, the failure rate has dropped to effectively nil. The defect has not been fixed, the bolts are still brittle, but the washers absorb enough stress to prevent fractures from propagating. Whitlock does not receive a medal, he does not receive a commendation. His name does not appear in the official report. The modification is credited to the 8th Air Force Material Command, described as a routine improvement to mounting hardware. The mechanics know, the crews know, but the paperwork does not care. In January 1944, a new batch of bolts arrives from the States. These are manufactured to revised specifications with controlled heat treatment and proper core-to-surface hardness ratios. The defect has been corrected at the source, but the washers remain in place. They are kept as an added safety margin, a redundancy that costs almost nothing and saves lives. Whitlock continues working the night shift. He continues filling his notebook with observations, sketches, measurements. He does not speak about what he did. When other mechanics ask, he shrugs and says he just noticed something that did not look right. But in the months that follow, 14 bombers suffer engine mount stress events, high vibration incidents, near failures, situations where the bolts begin to crack but do not separate. In every case, the stress washers prevent catastrophic failure. The engines stay attached, the bombers stay airborne, the crews come home. 14 aircraft, 140 lives, saved by a piece of metal the size of a coin, designed by a man who was told his opinion did not matter. By the spring of 1944, the stress washer modification has become standard across all American heavy bombers in Europe. It is quietly adopted by the 15th Air Force in Italy, then by the Pacific Theater B-29 groups. The modification is so effective and so inexpensive that it is incorporated into factory production. New aircraft roll off the Boeing assembly line with the washers already installed. The defective bolt problem is investigated. The source is traced to a subcontractor in Ohio, a firm that had altered its heat treatment process to increase production speed. The change reduced manufacturing time by 18%. It also compromised the metallurgical integrity of every bolt produced over a 6-month period. Thousands of bolts, hundreds of aircraft, an invisible defect that could have killed hundreds of airmen. The contractor is reprimanded, the process is corrected, but the damage is already in the supply chain. Depots across the world are sitting on stockpiles of defective bolts, visually indistinguishable from good ones. The Air Forces issue a recall, but it is incomplete. Some bolts remain in service for years, their danger mitigated only by the continued use of Whitlock's washers. No public announcement is made. The failure is classified, buried in maintenance bulletins and technical advisories. The official narrative remains unchanged. The bolts met specifications, the modifications were routine, and the Air Force's safety systems worked as intended. But within the maintenance community, the story spreads. Mechanics talk. They pass along the details, how a sergeant noticed what the engineers missed, how he built a fix with hand tools and stubbornness, how the Air Forces adopted it without admitting there was a problem. Whitlock becomes a legend in the depots. Not for glory or heroism, but for something rarer. He was right when the system said he was wrong. He trusted his hands and his eyes over certification stamps and approval chains, and he saved lives by refusing to accept an answer that did not match what he could see. The statistical impact is difficult to quantify precisely, but post-war analysis estimates that without the stress washer modification, engine separation failures would have continued at a rate of approximately 1 per 200 sorties. Given sortie volumes in early 1944, that projects to at least 40 additional losses before the defective bolts were fully replaced. 40 bombers, 400 men, lost not to the enemy, but to a metallurgical defect and a supply chain that prioritized speed over safety. Instead, those losses did not occur. The washers bought time. They kept aircraft flying while the system slowly corrected itself. They were a bridge between failure and fix, improvised by a man who understood that the war did not wait for paperwork. Raymond Whitlock returned to Dayton after the war. He reopened his machine shop, fabricating parts for turbines, pumps, and industrial engines. He did not speak much about his service. When asked, he said he fixed airplanes. When pressed, he said he was just a mechanic. He died in 1971 at the age of 62. His obituary mentioned his service in the Army Air Forces, but gave no details. His tools were sold at an estate auction. His notebooks, filled with sketches and measurements and observations, were donated to a local technical college where they sat in an archive, unread, for decades. In 1998, a historian researching 8th Air Force maintenance practices came across a memorandum dated December 1943 authorizing the field modification of engine mount hardware. The memo credited the modification to Technical Sergeant R. Whitlock, Thurley Depot. The historian traced the name, found the notebooks, and began to piece together the story. What emerged was not a tale of dramatic heroism, but something quieter and perhaps more important, a story about noticing, about persistence, about trusting evidence over authority and choosing action over compliance. Whitlock did not invent a new technology. He did not fly dangerous missions or lead men into battle. He simply looked at something everyone else had seen, recognized what they had missed, and refused to let it go. He built a solution with the tools at hand, tested it until it worked, and convinced a system designed to resist change that change was necessary. The stress washer is still used today. Modern variants, refined and optimized, appear in aircraft engine mounts, turbine assemblies, and high-vibration mechanical systems. It is a standard component, taught in engineering courses, specified in technical drawings. Most engineers who use it do not know where it came from, but its origin is a reminder. The war was not won only by generals and pilots and grand strategies. It was won by people who noticed, who measured, who questioned, who trusted their hands and their judgment even when the system told them they were wrong. 14 bombers stayed in the air because one man refused to accept that everything was fine when he could see that it was not. 14 crews came home because a sergeant with a file and a loop believed his eyes more than a certification stamp. History remembers the aces and the raids and the turning points. But it is built on 10,000 invisible choices, made by people whose names appeared only in maintenance logs and supply requisitions, people like Raymond Whitlock, who understood that precision is a form of honor, and that sometimes the most important thing you can do is notice what everyone else is willing to ignore. His washers still fly. His name is mostly forgotten, but every engine that stays attached, every bolt that holds under stress, every crew that lands safely, carries an echo of the night. A mechanic looked at a broken bolt and decided that good enough was not good enough at all.